Hi, this presentation is about malware and social engineering attacks. It is based on the book Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, Chapter 2. Malware has become a very serious threat to computer security. It's easy to create malware, actually. You don't have to be a genius or a rocket scientist. There are actually several commercial kits that you can buy that allow you to easily create your own malware. Malware infects a computer without the user knowing it. And before we go too much further, the classification of malware is ever evolving. So things I might say today, or things I might have said yesterday, change and are in flux because malware is in flux. Malware, viruses, and so forth change almost on a daily basis. Some malware spreads, where that means to propagate itself, and this includes the two types known as viruses and worms. Some malware is actually just concealed within other programs or other files, and it's important to note that most malware has a profit motivation. You would not expect any kind of a computer professional, if you would really call these guys a professional, they're more like malcontents or whatever, but you wouldn't expect people to spend a lot of their time on this kind of software if there wasn't some sort of profit that goes with it. So let's start with viruses, the first of the two classifications. There are actually three types of propagation that viruses use. The first is an appender infection. This is where the virus appends itself to an existing program. Now, if you append yourself to an existing program, it's very difficult to find the alteration to that program because everybody expects that program to be there in the Windows directory or the System32 directory or whatever. But since it's appended to an existing file, it's much harder to detect. And what happens is they slightly alter that program that it gets appended to so that the appended part of it gets run when the regular program gets run. The next type of infection is called a Swiss cheese infection. This is somewhat similar to the appender infection, except that the virus does not append itself to the end of a file. What it does instead is it takes the original file and places the content of the original file inside of itself. That way, when the original file, or you think the original file is run, actually the virus runs, and it in turn goes ahead and executes the code that is contained within itself. And the last of the major virus types is called a split infection. What happens here is that a virus is actually split into a bunch of small parts. And this actually makes it much more difficult to identify them as a virus because once they're split up into small parts, antivirus programs have a tough time identifying them as actually virus. And then a main program has some sort of table. And this is just a small piece of code. And the table inside of this reassembles the virus pieces and then runs it. So how can you tell if you have a virus? This is a pretty common question. Well, your computer crashes fairly often. Have you ever had it where your computer just kept crashing and crashing and you never really could figure out why? And it wasn't any one thing that made it crash. It was always kind of random, and just when you least expected it, your computer would crash. They also can erase files. They tend to erase files that have to do with system configuration and maybe security, but they can erase your own personal files too. They often make multiple copies of themselves, and they do this in order to try to stay alive. In other words, if an antivirus program finds 3 out of 7 of the copies, then it deletes them, but you still have those other 4 left. And then the other 4, when they run, they also replicate, so you end up with quite a few copies spread over your hard drive. One common thing that viruses do is they will alter your security settings. And the reason they do this is so that they can perform unintended actions that you really do not want them to do, such as edit your registry or change files in Windows or System 32. And the really most famous and most destructive thing that they sometimes do is reformat your hard drive. So here's a little bit more on virus replication. Virus replication actually needs access to your local computer. We think of viruses as replicating on a local computer. For instance, if you put a flash drive in your computer and there's a virus on the flash drive, it can replicate because now it has access to your computer. Or if you put a CD or an older floppy disk or something, then it can actually replicate based on that. Or if you download a file from the internet onto your hard drive and run it, then that can replicate a virus. But essentially, we think of viruses as needing to have local access to a computer in order to replicate. And they can come in the form of a program. For instance, like I said, you might run a program off your flash drive, and the program might then have some sort of virus as part of it. It might be in the form of a macro, and these are common in Word documents and Excel documents and so forth. And these macros really do the same things as a regular program, and they can do some pretty destructive things. There might be a resident virus, in other words, a virus that sort of is waiting around in random access memory or your RAM, and it's waiting around to look for the right opportunity then to replicate itself. There are boot viruses, which there's something on the hard drive called a master boot record, and this potentially can contain a very small virus. Now, this isn't quite the threat it used to be when we booted off of floppy drives, but it still is somewhat of a threat. And then there's what's known as a companion virus. And a companion virus is simply a copy of a legitimate file that the operating system needs to function. And what it does is it just overwrites the old file, such as xcopy or something, and then when you run that operating system file, the virus then replicates. So worms are different than viruses, and the big difference is that they replicate across a network. So the biggest difference between viruses and worms is that viruses replicate on a local machine and worms generally replicate over a network. Now, with that said, there are some gray areas, and that's because not all viruses and not all worms follow the strict rules. So just bear in mind you might find some gray areas and exceptions to these rules. So malware is something that is like a virus. In fact, it is a virus. It is a worm. Malware is actually has viruses and worms as its subset. It includes Trojans and rootkits and backdoors and logic bombs. Trojans, think of the big mythological attack where they snuck the horse in, the big horse, and they put the soldiers inside. And essentially a Trojan is a program masquerading as something you want or you use, but carried within inside of that is malware. Now, one very famous version of this kind of Trojan is, have you ever known people who downloaded cracked files off the internet? And a lot of times there's a key generator that comes with these programs. And the key generator simply generates a serial number for the program that you're trying to use or pirate, and then you get to use the program that you wanted to use. But these key generators many times contain a small piece of software that they install on your computer. So that's why they're called Trojans, because you get this program that you want to use, but inside of it is some little thing that you need to be aware of. Rootkits. Rootkits are a set of software tools used by an attacker to hide the actions or presence of other types of malicious software such as Trojans, viruses, or worms. And finally, logic bombs are malware that lie dormant for quite a period of time, or an undetermined period of time, until some event happens that triggers them off. So the profit motives for these things are that people are trying to make money. The botnets, these are programs that can be triggered to attack other computers. Sometimes we call these distributed denial of service attacks. I mean, they can take many forms. Adware, obviously, that's going to give you ads. Might put it into your browser. It might give you a pop-up. They take lots of forms. But adware is malware that gives you some sort of ads, and the guys who created it are charging companies fees for the ads that they deliver. And lastly, the one I fear the most are keyloggers, and these log every single key that's in your keyboard, including logins to secure sites or credit card numbers or things such as that. So now social engineering is a whole different category. Social engineering generally doesn't have that much to do with actual software. It has to do with people. And one of the reasons these attacks are so difficult is because no matter how good the security on a network is, or no matter how much the network admin has installed software and made things really tight, a social engineering attack can succeed with little or no effort. If an attacker can use persuasive techniques to let someone know that they mean no harm, or to let someone know that they can be trusted, then the attacker can actually gain access to a lot of their resources or files, or maybe use their computer. Hey, buddy, my computer is down. Can I just sit at your computer and use it for a minute? And this relies on the attacker to persuade the person that he means no harm and can be trusted. Impersonation is when, say, I call you and I say, "Hey, I'm in the network administration office and I need to check your password. Let me just have your password and I'll type it in and make sure it works okay over here." And someone might say, "Oh, okay, here's my password." But what you're doing is you're impersonating an authority figure or someone who should have access, but it's all a big scam. Phishing takes a number of forms. The most common is you get an email that says, "Hey, your account has been compromised," such as maybe PayPal. It might say, "Hey, your account has been compromised. Log on here to change your password." Okay, well, you log on and it looks exactly like the PayPal login, but unbeknownst to you, they have just created a special website that masqueraded as a PayPal login, and when you type in your login information, they have it. Or it might be something about eBay or Amazon. These are usually the most common things. Spam, obviously, is where you get ads and stuff in an email trying to get you to buy something or go to a website or something like that. Hoaxes, these take many, many forms. I remember once reading one that the post office was going to start charging 5 cents for every email that you sent because they're losing so much revenue. This obviously was a hoax. Dumpster diving is actually a very useful technique for many people. What they do is they go into the dumpsters of companies and they look for manuals that have to do with their computer system or their HR system or whatever, and they get them out and they read them and they figure out how to get into their network. And tailgating, essentially standing behind someone, watching what they're doing, or looking over their shoulder and trying to get information that way.